You know, election officials have faced unprecedented threats and harassment after they were unfairly blamed for election results in the 2020 election that certain politicians and voters did not like and did not want to accept. Last year, the threats for some election workers were so bad that they had to temporarily abandon their homes, spend their own money on increased home security, or even secure around-the-clock police surveillance. Election workers have had their young children and elderly parents threatened. For women and election workers of color in particular, the threats they've received have been particularly graphic and often include racist and gendered insults. Some election workers report that the harassment and threats are continuing to this day. A recent survey of election workers commissioned by the Brennan Center for Justice found that 1 in 3 election workers feel unsafe because of their job, and nearly 1 in 5 listed their lives being threatened as a job-related concern. Yet even in the face of these challenges and a global pandemic, election officials managed to run, quote, the most secure election in American history, according to a Trump official, with the highest turnout in more than 100 years. While the work election officials have done is heroic, several of America's political leaders have failed them. Former President Trump and his supporters have attempted to delegitimize the 2020 election results through the repeatedly debunked, quote, stop the steal movement fueled by the big lie, the unfounded theory that the 2020 general election was swayed by widespread voter fraud. This disinformation campaign has villainized election officials, many of whom believe that these claims are the reason that election officials are under attack. More than half of the election workers interviewed recently by the Brennan Center said that social media made their jobs more dangerous. Now, the threats to election officials have spread far beyond Trump and the Stop the Steal movement. In several states, party leaders have censured and replaced election officials who told the truth about the security and accuracy of the 2020 election. Dark money groups are taking advantage of and amplifying the spread of disinformation, weaponizing it to get legislation restricting access to the ballot introduced and passed in states. Legislators had introduced bills to impose criminal penalties on election officials who try to expand access to the ballot by taking steps like proactively sending mail-in ballot applications, and would subject poll workers to criminal penalties for removing partisan election observers accused of voter intimidation. Finally, state legislators have taken steps to divest local election officials of their power to run, count, and certify elections, turning elections into a partisan process subject to political interference. Congress has not only the power but the duty to act to address this deluge of subversive bills. To start, Congress should pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which would combat disinformation and prevent the kind of threats election officials have received. Additionally, H.R. 4064, the Preventing Election Subversion Act of 2021, would protect election officials by prohibiting the harassment and intimidation of election workers and restricting the removal of local election officials in elections for federal office without cause. It also protects voters from intimidation when voting in person by restricting who may challenge voters in federal elections and when those challenges may occur, and prohibits observers from getting within 8 feet of voters. We'll hear more about H.R. 4064 today. The work of election officials is fundamental to our democracy. They are dedicated public servants who administer free and fair elections. American democracy would not survive without them, and Congress needs to take steps to ensure they are protected. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, and I would now like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Davis, for his opening statements.